Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Business Revolution in our series of changing conversations. And I'm really delighted to be joined today by Tania Elfersy. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Tania. And she is from the Wiser Woman, and she transforms the experience of those women who are in their midlife at the moment and facing all the changes that happen. And I'm smiling as I say this because I am one of those women experiencing those midlife changes, but fortunately not to the extent as some. So I'm going to hand over to Tania so that she can explain a little bit more about her business and the coaching that she does, but more importantly, the journey that she has been on, bringing this understanding to this sector of the population and the issues that she faces, including one, am I qualified enough, which I think we can all identify with. So hello, Tania, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm excited to get to this topic.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit more. I mean, it may seem obvious, but tell us a little bit more about how you came to applying the principles to this particular area.
Right. Okay. So just to step back a little bit to give a little bit background of where I came from. I used to work in corporate marketing in technology companies, and then I became an at-home, stay-at-home mum, and had 3 kids, and then slowly went back into the workspace. I had this idea to publish a book for new mums, and I worked with a friend. We co-authored the book, and then I went ahead and self-published it. It won all these awards, and then my return to the workplace was, as it were, to sell the book. And what's so interesting about that I only understand now is that the whole creative process of creating the book, and it's this full color hardback gift book for new mums talking about how motherhood impacts our lives. That was all just a dream. No thought really involved in that. That was all me showing up thinking, what should we do next? What's the next step? What's the next step? And that just came out so beautifully and won 4 awards and everything, and well loved and everything. And then I came to marketing it and trying to sell it. And I had been out of the business world for a while, and when I left marketing, people weren't using blogs. There were no podcasts, there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there was no nothing. And so I looked around me and I was like, oh, I know nothing. So now I need to learn from everyone else, like what to do. And there was this switch that happened of, oh, I need to, copy it. I need to, it's fine, someone can teach you how to use Twitter or maybe some tips and techniques, Facebook or blogging and things like that. But I was just got really into, the 10 steps to sell, to market, to do your business, and got, took more and more courses and got more and more lost and just sort of was pedaling on empty and not managing to sell my book at all, and not anywhere near what I thought I would be able to do. And just really feeling really bad with myself, feeling really like I'd failed, and we put money into this book and I wasn't making, I wasn't even making back the costs, and just working so hard and balancing that with motherhood. I just felt like I was falling apart, like nothing was working. And at that time I was sort of in my early 40s, and I had never heard about peri-menopause, and I wasn't even thinking about midlife change. Thought that must, menopause, I'd heard of that, but I thought that's like 51, and why would I need to be thinking about that? And I started suffering from a lot of symptoms. Started with sort of me picking up all my kids' viruses all the time, which was something new that I never, never had happened before in motherhood. And then sort of some hair loss, and then lots of migraines, and then night sweats and eczema and skin outbreaks. And the biggest thing was I was experiencing, I only knew like later on what this was, but like really big mood swings. And what was happening was I was experiencing about 2 weeks of PMS every month, which was a joy for everyone around me. For me too. And so it was a few years of going through these symptoms and running everywhere to try and cure my symptoms, and running acupuncture and herbs and healing and Bach remedies and everything like that, and everything could sort of take the edge off my symptoms, could give me a little bit of relief. But I always felt underneath that there was just something not right. There was something like boiling up inside of me, and I didn't know what it was. And after a few years of that, I heard about peri-menopause, which is the time leading up to menopause. Menopause doesn't happen in an instant, which for some reason before we think about it, we think it might do. Just as when we're teenagers, it takes time. The end of our reproductive cycles also takes time to shift to a different gear. And that sort of gave it a framework. And I realized my symptoms are totally common. This is totally what lots of women experience. But everything just seemed to revolve around, oh, so it's your hormones. You need to fix your hormones. You need to fix your hormones. That's what's going wrong. And none of that really made sense to me. But anyway, I was still, plodding through, trying to sell my book, work out what I would do online, what would be my next step. And I sort of made this promise to myself, well, if I ever work out what can bring me symptom relief in a natural way, then I'm really going to share that, because that will be magical. That will be it. Mm. And as we were talking a bit earlier, I took another online business course. This one was a bit different because it was introducing as well the 3 principles in business. And so it was a very much more sort of showing up with an intuitive approach to business, very different from how I'm trying to be, taking everyone else's ideas about marketing and how to sell, and working much more from the inside and sort of feeling inspired, like moving in the direction that you felt inspired to move in. And completely mind-blowing, change of gear. And while I was taking that course, I read Michael Neill's book, The Inside Out Revolution. I had an insight about, you don't need to take your thoughts so seriously. And I think it'll be easier if you don't. Mm. My biggest core thought that just kept on running on and on and on, and I kept on taking it really seriously and thinking it defined me, was this idea that I'm not enough, that I'd somehow failed. Because I used to be the breadwinner, I used to have a stable salary, I used to have all that going on, and it was fine, when I was being stay-at-home mom, then that was fine. Then I imagined my re-entry into the workforce and what kind of money I should be making and how I should be contributing to the family, and all these shoulds going on. And I felt that, constantly it was feeling like I'd somehow failed and I wasn't enough. Mm. And having that insight, you need to take your thoughts so seriously, I knew that was about that thought. Well, that's just a thought, right? That doesn't define me. And no one else was telling me, oh, you're a failure. You're not enough. That was just what was running through my head. But it's made of thought. And when I really saw that, all my symptoms disappeared, literally within days. So the physical symptoms, the emotional symptoms, they all just disappeared. And it was like my body was like, okay, now the body can work as it's supposed to, knows how to work. And so nothing had changed. Finally, still today I'm 50, still menstruating, don't mind sharing that. But definitely, changes in my periods. But like so many women, changes in your periods come later on, after many women experience symptoms, and then the changes in the period happen later. So I'm definitely, getting closer to menopause itself. But and my hormones are still in flux, but I just don't have symptoms anymore through having followed the insight. And so I kept my promise, and I started sharing. Mm-hmm. And when I did, was like, well, I think I have something interesting to share, because I think what's just happened to me is pretty unusual, and I'd already been researching a lot about perimenopause and speaking to a lot of women about their symptoms. No one I knew had had that experience. And going back to our topic, I was like, I had moved from thinking, oh, I'm not enough, and that had completely disappeared. So, well, who's like, am I qualified enough? Like, who is going to listen to me, right? There are doctors like Dr. Christian Northrup who had big influence on my work. Why would anyone want to listen to me? Like, what do I have? And I kind of just put that on the side, because I had seen, well, if I'm inspired to do it, I'm inspired to share my experience and everything I've learned, which was just like weaving together the understanding of the 3 principles and my understanding of midlife women's health. Then perhaps, if that's what I'm inspired to do, then perhaps that's what I should just try and do. And that's how my journey really started, with the Wiser Woman.
That's just such a beautiful journey. And what I love about it is the ease and flow of it. Like, you didn't set out to do it to start with. It wasn't something that you figured out at the beginning. It was something that you just followed, as you say, very intuitively. If I can pick up on the kind of the am I qualified enough, because I think so many people who are listening will just go, oh yeah, I really understand that. How do you deal with challenges to people? If people ask you, what qualifications do you have, or why do you know so much, or how do you know so much? How do you deal with that?
Right. So first of all, within myself, I saw pretty quickly, after my initial, like, why would anyone listen to me? Why wouldn't people go to the doctor? I saw that there was something unique about what I was sharing. This combination of weaving together the principles and an understanding of midlife women's health, and not looking at it from an idea of your hormones are malfunctioning, and then let's see what we can do about that, which is, even in the alternative world, that's like, you can go to an acupuncturist and they're like, oh yeah, I need to stabilize your hormones, and I need to do that, and they can even have that hormonal picture. So I saw quite quickly, oh yeah, there is something unique about what I'm sharing. And I did also see that no one could actually give me a qualification for what I wanted to share, because it didn't appear that anyone else was sharing what I was sharing. So, because I had that fear of, well, perhaps I need, to get some name, letters after my name or something. And then I was like, but who would qualify me for this, for sharing what I'm sharing? That's my experience. Now, as it happens, I give talks and, meet people and tell them what I do. And I often get that question, because I'm working with women around their health. But, are you a doctor? Are you a psychologist? Are you a psychotherapist? What experience do you have? What qualifications do you have? I'm just like, oh, I just have my experience, and I'm sharing about that. And it turns out that I can help women. But today I feel very confident saying that. But there have been times when I've given a talk, for example, and there'll be a member of the medical community who could be a doctor, and this happens online, or when I give live talks or whatever, like a psychotherapist or someone in the medical field, a doctor or something like that, and they will sometimes just try and hold the conversation and sort of throw out medical jargon and things like that. And I've had people say to me, in talks, you can't say that, you're not a doctor. And the thing that I now understand is that there are a lot of things that I actually can say, because I'm not a doctor. And I'm not saying there isn't a place, obviously, for modern medicine, because it can do tremendous miracle performing acts, especially in terms of emergency medicine. Lucky we live in this era.
Yeah.
However, when it comes to midlife women's health, it really has a bad track record. So when, for example, I've had doctors say to me, I've got 20 years of experience helping women, you know, through the menopause, etc. I happen to know that over those 20 years, what doctors are allowed to say has changed enormously with the science of the day. So I know that doctors have been telling women different stories over 20 years, over 40 years, right? And I'm quite sure, because I'm looking at something that's innately true about women's health, not dependent on 18 years of research that looked at the effects of a specific medication and its effects on heart disease, and those trials, they come out, the research comes out, and we've seen it recently in, like, actually it was all over the world, the Lancet, the research that was published in the Lancet that talked about risks from HRT are higher than previously thought. And the thing is, these kinds of research papers have been coming out for decades, and the goalposts, if you like, have changed about what people understand about menopause and how it's talked about in medicine. And so I appreciate that there are doctors who are trying to help women, and yet, like I said, medicine just hasn't done a really good job in that area. And I think it's because there's a fundamental misunderstanding of how where, let's say, our innate health lies. And fundamental misunderstanding of the existence of wisdom that lies in our body and doesn't ever stop running through us. And so, I can see that in my work, and I can share that in my work, but for a doctor to be able to share something like that, pretty unusual from my experience.
Yeah, I would think it would be quite unusual from my experience too. So for those who may be new to the principles, and you touched on there about our own innate health and our wisdom, how has that enabled you to achieve better levels of health? I just wondered whether you could talk about that just for a little bit, because I think that would be fascinating to cover.
Right. So on my journey, I began to see more and more that this whole narrative that we've bought into, that our bodies are naturally designed to malfunction, and especially for women, it's actually across all society, this idea, you age and you malfunction, right? But especially for women, there's this idea, you get to midlife, your hormones start going crazy, and then it's malfunction time. Like, you're going to go crazy with all your symptoms. And so that narrative is founded on normally two myths. One of them is that women were never supposed to live this long, right? Women were never supposed to live beyond menopause. And that myth comes around because we look at these average life expectancy charts, right? And they're average life expectancy charts. And they go like this, it's called a hockey stick chart. People say, you see, 200 years ago, women were dropping off before the age of 40. Now, they never use it against men, always used against women. So interesting. The thing is, those average life expectancy charts show the average life expectancy, and through the ages, the average life expectancy was low because child mortality rates were incredibly high. So you could have, in 16th century England, 1/3 of children wouldn't survive beyond the age of 6. 2/3 wouldn't survive beyond the age of 16. But if you made it past the age of 16 into adulthood, you had a very good chance of living into your 70s, right? So this idea that women weren't designed to live beyond menopause, and that's why, I can't tell you the number of times I hear it. Like, you know, I just heard it on Women's Hour just a few weeks ago. You know, it's just, it's everywhere. And when it comes up, no one challenges it. Even doctors, they're sort of happy. There are very few doctors who will actually say that, because I think they understand that it's just false. But they won't challenge it because it just fits very nicely with the whole narrative of women malfunctioning somehow in midlife. So women, we can find examples of women living through the menopause from the Bible even. And the women who live beyond menopause, they weren't ever described, not in the Bible, not in Greek or Roman texts, as like extraordinary freaks of nature. No, you know, in writings from Roman times, sort of medical writings from Roman times, they talked about women in the menopause not as these freaky women that live beyond. You know, and we know, for example, ancient Greek philosophers lived till their 70s. Well, you think just the men? Like, okay, we don't know about the women because they didn't write about them, because they weren't so important, etc. But menopause was mentioned not as a, you know, something so unusual in nature, but it was understood. And if Greek philosopher men were living into their 70s, then women were living into their 70s too, if not beyond, since we know that wherever we have the data, women outlive men. So there's that idea, which really became popular mid last century when the hormone revolution really took off, the hormone replacement revolution took off, and that idea sort of like really became popular. Oh yeah, it's because women were never supposed to live this long. Like I said, only used against women. And then the other idea is this idea that also really ancient idea of like women's bodies are sort of are prone to malfunction, right? Which is this idea, you know, women bleed, they didn't understand our menstruation really, they didn't understand birth, they didn't understand, you know, medicine didn't understand women's bodies. And so there's this whole idea of like fear of women's bodies don't know, and thus they're prone, you know, and thus they're prone to malfunction. And I just thought, that just doesn't make sense, you know, on any level. It just doesn't make sense. And what's arisen today, sort of the narrative that we think is normal in terms of menopause, you can take it back to ancient texts, but you can even take it back to last century, the way they thought women should give birth. And perhaps some of the listeners may remember from The Crown, even when the Queen gave birth, when she was put to sleep to give birth, right? So that was called twilight sleep, and that became popular sort of early last century. And what was the idea behind it? So interesting. It was the idea behind, can we just remove woman from the picture, right? If we can just put her to sleep, then we will birth her baby. We, modern medicine, will come in and will birth her baby. So the whole idea, we'll put her into a semi-conscious state or unconscious state, or, you know, with different drugs that of course like had a really negative effect on the baby coming out. But, you know, we'll just remove woman from the picture and we'll go in and birth her baby. And that went on in the UK and US till the sort of 1970s, incredibly, that women would just go into hospital, they didn't even know, and they would just be put to sleep and their baby was birthed. And then the women would wake up and they would not remember giving birth. So they would have like a sort of like a difficulty connecting with this baby that they just gets handed to them, that's your baby. And, you know, the baby would often be born with forceps because the woman wasn't involved in birth, right? So they were pulling the babies out. And the baby was drowsy because it was drugged. So there was, you know, complete destruction, let's say, of any natural wisdom that's available within birth. And then women were told, oh, don't bother about breastfeeding your baby because formula is superior to what your body knows to produce, right? So this was all happening at the same time as the narrative that we now have today about menopause was being formulated around hormones, right? They were discovering hormones, isolating them, trying to understand them from early last century. And the first hormone replacement therapies, the estrogen therapy was approved by the FDA in the early 1940s. So this was when, you know, people thought formula milk was superior, and that women should be out of the picture when they give birth, and women are just designed to malfunction in midlife. Right? It's all the same. It's all about women's bodies don't know, as far as I see it. And I just thought that just none of this makes sense. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that my body knew how to develop from a baby to a toddler to a girl to an adolescent girl to, you know, entering my whole, you know, menstrual cycle to, in my case, becoming pregnant, becoming a mother, you know, moving all through all these stages of life without intervention. Like, and most women do go through those stages of life, right, without intervention. And even if we get symptoms when, for example, we're pregnant, no doctor's going to come and say, oh, your hormones are getting it wrong, right? They'll be like, oh, you're in a sensitive time, you're pregnant, are you working too hard, are you too stressed, are you, you know, stuff like this. And so we recognize pregnancy is a sensitive time. We kind of have an understanding that teenage years are also sensitive times, but midlife is like malfunctioning time. Well, midlife is just another sensitive time, right? And if I had wisdom running through my body since I was born, that wisdom doesn't stop just because I've reached midlife, right? My body is designed to live till old age, right? And like I said, we have examples of people who've lived to old age, and that was just common if you made it through to adulthood. So there must be innate health in me, right? It must be available to us all, right? If we're born with innate health, it doesn't disappear. That's just not the way wisdom works in our body. And once I could see this, like that step to the insight of, oh yeah, I don't need to take my thoughts seriously. It was just like a little further step. It was like, oh yeah, all that narrative about my hormones, that doesn't make sense. And oh, that's the missing link, right? That's the piece that just needs to be put in place. It's like, oh, and I'm having all this thinking, and I am innately healthy even when I have those thoughts, and even when I feel bad, and even when I have symptoms. Like, that doesn't mean my body's getting it wrong. That just means my body is really keen on sending me a message to wake me up. And it will do anything. Like, if something is out of balance, our bodies are going to do things to try and wake us up. And when we're in a sensitive time, we're really going to feel it.
That is so interesting. So interesting. I just really, really love that so much, because it's completely looking at it completely the other way. You know, it's taking the worrying that we might be doing during our perimenopause years, or the anxiety, or the stress that we might be feeling, or the mood swings, or whatever it is, and just saying, actually, we don't need to put anything on that.
Right.
That doesn't mean we're broken. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with us. Just as you say, it's just a signal.
Yeah. And it seems that this sensitive time is designed to wake us up, to protect us in the decades to come, right? Because if we look at incidences of chronic disease, for example, there is something that happens at midlife where the numbers go up, but it is not inevitable, right? It is not inevitable that we enter midlife and everything is downhill. It seems that what happens in men too, by the way, that there is an awakening. There is a built-in evolutionary interest that becomes alive, let's say, in the body, and tries to help us understand where good health lies. Right? And so if we can understand that that is going to protect, if we can understand that in midlife, we're going to be protected in the more sensitive years as we age, right? But if we try and mute all these messages coming out, you know, discomfort may turn into disease later on, right? So it seems to be part of the innate wisdom of the body that, like I said, never leaves us, that wants a shift to occur at midlife. And so it may be little things like, you know, I speak to lots of people, and men too, they're all of a sudden, oh, I can't eat this thing anymore, right? And all of a sudden they're realizing, oh yeah, that's just not, it's not good for me to eat that kind of cheese or steak late at night, or, you know, drink too much beer or whatever it is, right? They wake up too. And in women, it's something even more extraordinary, because as we move beyond the years when we could have children, it seems like a switch that was perhaps off a little bit when we were in our reproductive years for a purpose, right? Because we need to be available to look after other people if we're going to be having children, if that's the choice that we make, right? But so there's something that perhaps switches off in those years, or switches on in, if you want to say, that sort of openness to sort of be able to accommodate, you know, other lots of little needs, right? There's something that allows us to move beyond that, and there is a change, right? Our roles change. So whether we became a mother or not, we're moving to management level, or the wiser, what I like to call the wiser woman role, right? And our body wants us to move into that role, and to really embrace that role. It's really useful if we understand where innate health lies.
Yeah.
Right? Not only for us, because that's going to allow us to have a healthier journey through the decades to come, but also for the species. Yeah. Right? Because when we've been around and we've learned things and we've had awakenings, and we see something that's worth sharing, then the species is going to benefit from that.
Yeah. And you do see that, don't you? I mean, even when you're speaking, you know, people in my life, even myself, you know, are coming to mind and thinking, yeah, you know, you hit sort of your late 30s and your late 40s, and you are almost, something inside of you is saying there is something more to see now. Right.
And it's that push to connect with something that lights us up. Right? I hear so many times, you know, women who make a shift in their career, or take up some new hobby, or find something that they love. Why does that seem to be occurring in so many women? That can only be because it's healthy for us, right? That connection, and that's what research has shown, like that connection to something that lights you up, to a passion that makes you feel alive, preserves your health. So when it's bubbling to the surface, it's really useful if we can recognize that that's what it is, right? The whole idea of midlife crisis is like a misunderstanding of the feelings that we have that seem to be bubbling to the surface.
Yeah.
Right? And so people sort of think, oh, this, you know, I feel uncomfortable, blow it all up, right? Innocent conclusion, right? But maybe the body's think, oh, there is a shift that, you know, you could make. Now, is it going to be around your job, or is it going to be around the fact that you don't move enough in the right way, or is it going to be about cleaning up your diet a little bit, or is it going to be about connecting to your passion? That's what our body wants us to discover. And so the only way that our body can encourage us to do that is sending us symptoms. Feelings, first of all, and then when we ignore those feelings, or we misinterpret them as like, oh, then that must mean, you know, this uncomfortable feeling, that must mean that there's something wrong about what's going on. No, that feeling just shows you where your state of mind is, right? That tells you what's true about your thoughts in that moment, but not about the situation. But we have that misunderstanding about that. But we we misunderstand our feelings. We think that means there's something really wrong. And then the body will send us symptoms.
Yeah.
Because we haven't understood what's really going on and what the body really wants, what the wisdom inside of us is trying to point us towards.
Yeah. We see that, don't we? And the symptoms, they get more or they get louder when we ignore them, or we're not really addressing the issue. And then we wonder why we're getting poorer and poorer health. And actually it's because we're simply not listening. And how often, when we talk to someone or even ourselves, we know what we need to do.
Right. And it's
where wisdom comes through.
Yeah. It's like things it's where we have a story about it. So for example, if we just, there's a time we're working really hard, not getting enough sleep, etc., and then we get the flu, for example. We know, oh yeah, that's because I worked really hard, wasn't getting enough sleep, my body needs to rest. So there's sometimes that we can see, oh yeah, there's a wisdom in that, right? My body really needed me to slow down, needs to heal a bit, and then we can move on, hopefully at a different pace. But when it's tied into like this idea of, oh no, my body's just malfunctioning, that's just what happens, that's it, like we can't see the wisdom in it.
No, because we just write it off and we say, oh, well, it's because we're older. It's because I was, I had PMT or whatever. And we give that narrative to it. We give that age-old excuse. So we stop listening.
Right.
We just kind of just tick that box, don't we? And say, oh, that's because of such and such. And then we're not listening to ourselves anymore.
Yeah.
We just kind of listen to the label. Yeah.
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 So it really comes down to the brilliance that exists in the body.
Mm.
And going back to our topic of, well, am I qualified enough? Right. I've seen that in my body and believe it in the bodies of the women I work with, right? Their bodies are as brilliant as my bodies. Doctors do not generally tell their patients that their body is brilliant.
Yeah.
And that's my passion, to share that and help women see that. Because when we see that, our health shifts in really amazing ways.
Yeah. And what I'm seeing from hearing you today is that really deeper knowing about that. And that really champions that, am I qualified enough? And I was just kind of, it occurred to me about other entrepreneurs who may be listening and say, well, am I qualified to do this? We know that we are on that deeper level, and you can see the changes that you're making with your clients or those that you're talking to. That is your kind of, you wanted like evidence, that is your evidence. And no amount of paper qualifications can really talk to that, can they? But I think we just get caught up in that narrative as well, don't we? That, oh, do I need a PhD, or do I need to go and do this course, or do I need to go and work with that person? And we get stuck in that narrative that actually qualifications mean that you are qualified. And actually the two are very different in my mind, or can be very different in my mind.
Yeah. And all I've done, I was speaking to a friend about this yesterday, and she was like, oh, it appears that you're preg, but she's also in the 3P community. It's like, I see all you are is just going where your inspiration takes you. That's what you're doing. And it's true. And when people encounter my work, people have very different reactions to my work. I understand it's not my work. It's what they're, where they are when they encounter my work, right? So really, some posts create so much love and so much discomfort, at the same time, the same word in one post, right? And when I get negative feedback or nasty comments or my work censored, or I've been kicked out of some Facebook group. All of this goes on. It's okay, right? And at the beginning, I know when people would say to me, "You can't say that. You've got no qualifications. You're not a doctor. You're not, all of this." Then I would sort of freeze up, because I'd be like, "Oh God, I've gone too far. Maybe I shouldn't have said that." That. And then what so often happens is, the people who really feel discomfort from your work, they're the ones that shout really loud. And then there are people who like being touched by your work, and their reaction is much gentler. It might take a little while to come, but that's what happens. And then people will reach out to me and say, "Oh, you can't understand, like, what that did, for me, that blog or that podcast, whatever it was, all these changes started happening." And all I'm doing is sharing what I see and moving in the direction that I'm inspired to. And understanding that, people are always going to say to me, "You're not qualified, or how can you possibly consider yourself an expert on anything to do with midlife women's health?" And I'm just like, well, okay.
Thank you so much for coming on today. It's just been fascinating, absolutely fascinating talking to you. And thank you for sharing your journey with us. If anybody wants to get in contact with you, what's the best place for them to do so?
Yeah, they can go to thewiserwoman.com. So that's all one word, thewiserwoman.com. And they can contact me through the website, or they can look me up on Facebook. And on my website, there's lots of resources in the blog, lots of posts that women might find helpful. And yeah, that's the best place to start. So yeah, I work with women one-on-one, and I offer webinars, and I give live talks, etc. So there are many ways that women can encounter them.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a pleasure having you, and I wish you all the best for the future. And yeah, please just carry on this amazing work. I think it's great.
I will, as long as I'm inspired to.
As long as you're inspired to. That's great. Well, thank you very much.